So let's talk about what President Trump calls the big, beautiful bill. The U.S. Senate obviously now is considering it. What changes would you like to see made that were approved by the House? What do you want done?
Well, listen, we're going to get this done. We will get the one big beautiful bill passed. And the reason we're going to is because we have to. It's the main vehicle to carry out the mandate from the election. It's the main vehicle to secure the border, to rebuild the military, to unleash jobs and small businesses in America, to unleash American energy. And so we will get it done. The Senate is in the process of changing it, and my hope is the Senate will make it better. I'd like to see us cut more spending. I'll tell you one idea that I've been urging my colleagues to do, and an idea I urged the president in the Oval Office last week to do, is to end the Federal Reserve's practice of paying interest on bank reserves. For most of the history of the Fed, from 1913 until 2008, the Fed did not pay interest on reserves, and then it started paying interest on reserves fairly recently in 2008. In the last couple of years of the Biden administration, that expenditure skyrocketed, and it's spending now over $150 billion. That is your and my taxpayer money that is going straight to big banks. And roughly 40 to 50% of those banks are foreign banks. And so ending that practice, that one change alone would save $1.1 trillion over the next 10 years. So that's an example of the kind of cutting we can do. And I don't think we should be sending our taxpayer dollars to giant banks. I'm also urging that we include and make better multiple provisions that I've written. So, for example, this bill will include my legislation on no tax on tips. I wrote the legislation that exempts tips from taxes. That's going to be in the bill. That's a great victory for working men and women, for waiters and waitresses and bartenders and barbers and hairstylists and taxi cab drivers and all the working men and women who rely on tips. This bill also includes a version of my legislation on school choice, creating a federal tax credit for contributions to scholarship granting organizations in the states. That is enormously consequential. And I'll tell you, Jack, also in this bill is my legislation on what's called Invest America, also called Trump accounts. That is going to be in this bill. And I'll tell you, this is something I'm really excited about. Every child in America is going to have a personal investment account, and newborn children will have it seeded with $1,000 when they're born. That in turn will be invested in the S&P 500 in a broad-based stock portfolio. Each year, parents and family and employers can give up to $5,000 in a tax-advantaged account. And Jack, there are two massive benefits of these accounts. Number one, they let every kid in Texas, every kid in America enjoy the benefits of compound growth. So a little boy, little girl born this year, they have the $1,000 automatically invested, and if friends or family or an employer contributes $5,000 a year, if you assume historical rates of growth on the S&P 500 of 7%. That little boy or little girl, by the time he or she turns 18, will have $170,000 in that account. And if they keep contributing $5,000 a year, by the time that child turns 35, he or she will have $700,000 in that account. That is game-changing for every child in America. And the second big benefit of that, Jack, is you're creating a new generation of capitalists as our kids become stockholders invested with skin in the game. That's really powerful, and that is in the bill.
What do you say? Because I've seen some criticism of that by some conservatives who say this is nanny state. So what do you say to that? And then at the same time, this bill, as it was scored by the Congressional Budget Office, is going to make the deficit or debt rise by 2.4 trillion.
So let me take those one at a time. On the first point, listen, I think it's exactly the opposite. I've seen a few people on Twitter say this is socialism. Well, words matter. What is socialism? Socialism is government ownership or control of the means of production or distribution. That's what socialism means. This is 180 degrees precisely the opposite. This is creating millions of new capitalists where children are stockholders. And listen, 10 years from now, there's going to be a 10-year-old little boy who pulls out his cell phone and he looks at his account and he sees his personal investment account. And all of us have seen the sad statistics of young people who don't believe in capitalism anymore and who think socialism is a good idea. And for that 10-year-old boy, companies will not be some mean, scary corporation. That boy's going to look at his phone and say, hey, I own $100 of Apple stock. I own $75 of Boeing. I own $50 of McDonald's. And suddenly they are an owner in the businesses that are providing jobs in America. I think this 10, 20, 30 years from now, this provision that I've introduced and that is incorporated in this bill will be maybe the single most impactful provision in the entire bill.
And then just about the CBO
Yeah.
scoring that says this is going to raise the deficits by $2.4 trillion. That's still a lot of money, and some House Republicans were even concerned about this too.
Yeah, so I'd say two things on that. Number one, historically, CBO has been wrong in its scoring over and over and over again. They underestimate the economic growth from tax cuts. In the 2017 Trump tax cuts, CBO wildly underestimated the economic growth that the tax cuts produced. And so I am consistently skeptical of CBO's projections because they're proved wrong over and over and over again. But what I'll say secondly is listen, I agree we need to cut more spending. I went into the Oval Office last week with the president, and I handed the president $3 trillion of spending cuts that we could do on top of this bill. And so my hope is, I think the House produced a good bill. I'm glad they started this process. They worked hard to get it to us. My hope now is the Senate will make it better, and we will show more leadership in terms of fiscal restraint and spending restraint.
And what was I know you discussed one that would produce 1.1 trillion over a 10-year period as far as the payments to banks. But what's the other 2 trillion?
Yeah, I broke down a whole series of spending cuts. So, for example, removing illegal aliens from federal government welfare benefits, that saves hundreds of billions of dollars. That is a major cost saving. Another is expanding work requirements to receive federal benefits. I think work requirements are incredibly helpful and beneficial for young, healthy people. We saw the great success of welfare reform in 1995, welfare reform that put work requirements on just one federal welfare program. And it resulted in millions of people going back to work, getting a job. Bill Clinton, a Democrat, signed that into law, and it was incredibly successful. So I urge the president, let's expand that across the range of federal benefits so that young, healthy adults will be incentivized to get a job. Because I think every American wants to have the dignity of work, the self-respect. There's something really powerful about providing for your family, about a mom coming home carrying groceries that she bought with the money she earned and providing for her family. And so those are two examples that both of which save hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars.
And then my last question to you, Senator, and that is just on Medicaid, because what CBO is saying is that 7.8 million people are going to lose this benefit. And that's a lot of people. And Democrats say this is really going to hurt these people. And they also say, that this is going to be life and death. What do you say to that?
Well, listen, some component of those numbers are people who are engaged in fraud. In other words, people who are not qualified for Medicaid and are fraudulently getting it. And I think it is exactly right that we should remove people who are engaging in fraud from getting Medicaid at the taxpayer's expense. Others of those are illegal aliens, and I don't think we should be spending taxpayer money, providing health care for illegal aliens. Beyond that, what CBO is talking about is the work requirements. And they say, well, gosh, if they don't get a job, they'll lose the benefit. Look, the whole purpose of this is to incentivize them to get a job. And as I said, CBO's projections are consistently wrong in this. I'll mention one other aspect of Medicaid that is actually Obamacare, and this is something President Obama did. Created a differential. So in a lot of big blue states, they've done what's called Medicaid expansion. Medicaid was designed for the most vulnerable among us, for those with serious disabilities, for young kids. And the federal government typically pays about half of the cost of health care for Medicaid for the most needy among us, and the states pay the remaining half. Under Obamacare, they created a different regime for young, healthy adults where the federal government pays 90% of the cost and the state just pays 10% of the cost. So Texas has not expanded Medicaid. We said, okay, that's really dumb to incentivize and prioritize the health care of young, healthy adults ahead of kids and people with severe disabilities. And so Texas did not expand, but states like California and New York are spending huge amounts in terms of federal tax dollars. And it's a perverse incentive because California is incentivized to provide less health care to the people who really need it, to kids and people with disabilities, and more health care to 25-year-old healthy men. That doesn't make any sense.
As you know, the U.S. Senate is now looking at the reconciliation bill approved by House Republicans, and the Congressional Budget Office is out with more insight into what President Trump calls his one big, beautiful bill. And it says that 7.8 million people will lose Medicaid coverage by 2034, and that the as far as the tax cuts, the bill's benefits increase steadily with income. So, what do you make of those headlines that are coming out of the CBO?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's something that we've been talking about for a long time, that there are going to be a lot of people that lose their coverage, both Medicaid recipients and individuals that are on the exchanges. And it's going to be detrimental, particularly to a state like Texas, where you have such a high percentage of residents that, really do rely on Medicaid services in order for their coverage. We already have a very strained healthcare system here in the North Texas area. Our two county hospitals, both in Tarrant and in Dallas, are already overwhelmed. Our federally qualified health centers in both Dallas and Tarrant counties are overwhelmed. You have really high, what they call self-pay rates, particularly in the system here in Tarrant County. And it's going to be, detrimental. You're going to see mortality rates rise. And you're going to see a lot of people that voted for Trump, people from areas in your viewership that don't live in a district like mine that is much more Democratic, but they live in places like Northeast Tarrant County or Aledo or Weatherford or in Kaufman County or places in Denton County or Johnson County that were that were very much on the MAGA bandwagon, and they are literally going to see their health care coverage ripped right from up under them, and they're going to be in the same situation or worse than many of the constituents that I represent in places like Stop Six and Oak Cliff, and it is going to hurt.
And let me just ask you, because as it relates to the Medicaid cuts, the House Energy and Commerce Committee told me that according to the House budget, based on CBO scoring and projections, is still saying that the Medicaid growth is still going to grow by quite a bit of money in 2034. It's still going to grow by over 30% and by $1 trillion above inflation, even with all these cuts. So the Republicans have said that the growth that they're seeing under Medicaid is just unsustainable, and that people who are on it, people who are able-bodied and working, some states like California, I believe, have allowed people who aren't in the U.S. legally to be on there. And so, what do you say to that? They say the
Yeah,
Republicans have said they really want to focus on the pregnant women, the poor, the disabled that this program was designed for originally.
I would say that, first of all, there are a lot of nuances in that I don't think that the Republicans are explaining to people on purpose. And the biggest thing that I would say is that, someone that's pregnant would need to verify probably more than once during the pregnancy that they're actually, pregnant. And that's the sort of thing that is going to end up through attrition, kicking people off of the rolls. And, we can look no further in North Texas than our friends just a few hours to the north of us in Arkansas. In Arkansas, when they put these what they call work requirements in place, it ended up being a disaster for that state. It created a healthcare calamity where you saw thousands and thousands of people lose their coverage and never regain it because it was, so rigorous and really, punitive to a lot of low income families. And again, all that's going to do is just put extra strain and burden on our local county hospitals, on our FQHCs. And what it's also going to do is exacerbate poor healthcare outcomes because people won't go to the doctor anymore because they won't have a practitioner. They'll go and get all of their needs through the emergency room. And so instead of going to get checkups, instead of doing preventive care, instead of doing those sorts of things, they are literally going to end up just not being treated. And so I'm very concerned about that. I think that it's going to look a lot more like Arkansas. I don't think that you're going to see the numbers grow. I think that you're probably going to see 16 million people lose their health care. And it's going to be through, again, a lot of the attrition and people just becoming frustrated because this is something they're going to have to do over and over and over again to prove that they are Medicaid eligible through these work requirements, and they're going to lose their health care. I think that that's literally what it's going to come down to. And I want to remind everyone too, because the whole able-bodied or narrative, doesn't really give an accurate picture of who's on Medicaid. Most of the people that are on Medicaid are already working. They're people that are poor, they're low income, and they're on Medicaid, and they're out there busting their butt for North Texas. They're busting their butt for Texas and America in a lot of really tough jobs that just don't have adequate health care coverage, and they don't make enough money. And so they need Medicaid in order to be able to take care of their families. And a lot of those individuals, they're just not going to have the time or understand the rules in order to just be on this continual cycle that they have to, prove themselves over and over again just in order to stay eligible for Medicaid.
And with regards to the tax cuts, I know you and Democrats have said that this is really more for the billionaires than
Absolutely.
it is for the middle class. And I'm wondering, what would your solution be if you had an ideal bill that you and Democrats could pass? What would it include as far as tax cuts are concerned?
Probably would include a much smaller tax cut. I certainly believe that when we have an opportunity to cut taxes, that we should. And I'm not one of these, people that think that we ought to be, send out and met out extra punishment just because someone's been successful. That's not what I'm all about. I think that entrepreneurism and people that are wealthy in this country have created a lot of jobs. I just think that people need to pay their fair share. And so, kicking people off of healthcare services so Elon can have a tax break is not what I'm all about. But doing it responsibly is something that I think that Democrats have the ability to do. And I wish that Republicans had reached out to us and asked, hey, why don't y'all sit down with us and let's come up with a rate that's going to work without having to, again, kick low income people off of Medicaid and lay off a bunch of veterans from our local government related jobs that are here in the North Texas area. We've had thousands of people laid off so they could, lower the amount of money that was being spent on the federal payrolls to help also pay for this tax cut. That was one of the things that they were doing when you saw these massive layoffs and these massive cuts to these government jobs, that they were looking for money to help pay for this $1 trillion+ tax cut for Elon. And so, I think that's irresponsible, and I'm not for that, but I'm for sitting down and trying to work something out that makes a lot of sense. And I just don't think that this has any sense to it at all. I think it's crazy.
And I did want to ask you one other question, and that was this. I mean, the debt is close to $37 trillion right now.
Right.
So what is the answer? I mean, doesn't spending have to be cut as part of this?
Yeah, spending absolutely has to be cut, but it needs to be done responsibly. I was a federal employee with the with GSA when I was in college under the student aid program. And at that time, Al Gore was tasked with what was known as reinventing government. And the way they reinvented government, and people, and there were some people that didn't like it then. I can remember people in the building at Fritz G. Langham in downtown Fort Worth in the Federal Depot there off of Felix and I-35 in Fort Worth. There were people there that didn't like that. But the way that Gore went about that task that President Clinton had him do was in a much more responsible and orderly way. And President Clinton actually balanced the budget. And so I am 110% about trying to do something about this out of control spending, this growing deficit. And I just want to remind everyone again, particularly for viewers in a lot of those red areas here in the North Texas area, that the biggest increases that we've seen in the deficit have been from Trump. And that's why you have seen members like Massey out of Kentucky, Thomas Massey, say they're not going to vote for this because all it's doing is running up the deficit. And so it's been Trump where we've seen the biggest increases in the deficit. We saw it during his first presidency. And if he's able to get this bill passed in its current form, then we're going to see him increase the deficit to even higher record numbers than they are now. And so people need to wrap their heads around the fact that the old Republican Party that used to talk about trying to decrease the deficit and try to stop this out of control spending, that Republican Party is gone. Under the new party of Trump, if he can give a tax cut to a bunch of people that live in rich gated communities and are billionaires like Elon Musk, he's going to do it if it means increasing the deficit. And he doesn't care about that old orthodoxy. He wants to do the cuts and he wants to run up deficit spending because he always wants to get his way.
I got to ask you about some of the headlines that we've seen in the last week, and that is this New York Times report that President Trump wants Governor Abbott to call a special session for redistricting of congressional districts. Have you heard anything about this?
Well, I have, and read the story you read, have seen all the news that's been going around, and have been in communication with our counterparts in Washington and with the governor's office and the speaker's office and the lieutenant governor. And look, we're going to do what's right for Texas. We're going to do what's lawful. We, of course, drew maps, congressional, House, Senate maps in 2021 after the census. I was on the redistricting committee at that time. And so, look, we're gonna see what happens over the next few weeks. And if the governor calls us back into special session, whether it's on redistricting or any other matter, then we'll show back up to Austin and we'll do our jobs.
Are you expecting that, and is this something you support?
Look, when it comes to special sessions, Jack, I've been doing this long enough to not expect or anticipate anything or to predict what might happen. I trust the governor's going to do the right thing. I will say we need to be careful and cautious when it comes to every issue, but certainly issues like this dealing with 31 million voters and making sure that their voices are adequately and fully and lawfully protected and at every level. And so when it comes to redistricting, we take that task very seriously, and we'll work, like I said, again, with our counterparts in Washington and here at the state level, and take also direction from the courts when it comes to what we might be able to do and when we might be able to do it.
But those conversations have taken place.
Those conversations are ongoing. What's going to happen, I'm not sure, but I know that every option is on the table, and we'll see what happens going forward.